Hi everyone, I'm going to be presenting my second lesson today. So I'm going to be presenting a lesson on still life drawing, which is an essential skill to learn if you're an artist, how to observationally draw. So for the purpose of this lesson, just pretend that you are a 9th grade art class. And this could be intro to art, this could be creative process, or drawing. So I quickly just wanted to go over the visual content standards that we're going to be meeting. Through experimentation, practice, and persistence, demonstrate acquisitions of skills and knowledge in a chosen art form. Inquiry methods of observation, research, and experimentation to explore unfamiliar subjects through art making. Identify types of contextual information useful in the process of constructing interpretations of artwork or collections of works. So we're just going to think about that as we go through the lesson, and then I'm going to touch upon that again at the end. The supplies that you're going to need for this lesson are the classroom sketchbook, which, if you remember, I provided to you at the beginning of the semester. And this is basically where you write down your thoughts or your answers or any question in the presentation. And this is also where you will sketch ideas for your projects and practice your drawing. And then a piece of drawing paper or a drawing pad is also needed for this assignment, an easel or a desk. I tried to keep in mind that this lesson could work for in a classroom setting as well as digital learning. So if you were in a classroom setting, an easel would be ideal because standing is much better when you're drawing. It's healthier for you, and you don't have as many back problems from hunching over all the time. But if you're at home, that's great too. Just try to find a comfortable place for you to draw. And then all you're going to need after that is a pencil and an eraser. So I tried to keep in mind how many supplies we could use and not use. And I wanted to keep the supplies pretty simple. So the first question we need to ask is, what is a still life drawing? One of the principal genres of painting of Western art. So when we talk about principal genres, we're talking about like the landscape, portrait, still life, anything that defines a painting. And then essentially a still life is subject matter, is anything that does not move or is dead. And then still lifes include all kinds of man-made or natural objects, cut flowers, fruit, vegetables, fish, game, wine, and so on. A still life can be a celebration of material pleasures such as food and wine, or often a warning of the ephemerality of these pleasures and the brevity of human life. So this is kind of a complicated definition, which is from the Tate Museum, but basically it's saying that still lifes are just all sorts of objects that don't move, and if it's an animal, it shouldn't be living, and it's talking about the meaning of still life. So still life can be a celebration of things, but it also can represent how short life is and how sad or how vague life is. So why do we create still lifes? I really liked this definition. The magic of still lifes drawing is that they can show us a new way of looking at ordinary objects around us. Once they are placed into a specific arrangement and then captured in paint, ink, pastel, or any other medium, the objects take on a whole meaning. They are imbued with a life beyond the ordinary, which is really cool. So still lifes are more than you think by looking at them. They're not just a random composition of objects. When they are arranged and the objects are picked, they have meaning, and they do mean something to us as viewers and to the artist who created it. So I just wanted to go over a couple really important examples of still life artwork. So this is a painting by Caravaggio, who's a really famous painter, and this is one of the first real still life paintings. And Caravaggio was a brilliant painter. Everything he painted was hyper-realistic, and his lighting was just incredible. So Caravaggio is one of the greatest artists that ever lived. His representation of the still life basket of fruit is unique because it's realistic and unique portrayal. If you look closely at the painting, you can see that a lot of the fruits are spoiled and have been eaten by insects. So if you really look closely, you can see that all these fruit are not perfect. They have little marks, or they're aging. And it's a beautiful arrangement, but everything is slightly dying. Nothing looks perfect, and it looks like insects have started to destroy the fruit. So I want you to think about that for a second and look at the pictures and just think about, why would Caravaggio choose to portray dying and insect-ridden fruit instead of, a beautiful arrangement of fruit or flowers? So just take a minute to think about that. Write what you think in your sketchbook. So some of the answers, might be that it's more interesting to look at. And it is more visually interesting, but there is a deeper meaning. And the deeper meaning is he's trying to talk about life and human life through still lifes. He's trying to talk about, how short our time on earth is and how precious it is. It starts out beautiful, and then through time and through trauma, we start to decay, just like fruit. And we are picked on by other people and by the world. And his painting is actually very meaningful, even though you might not think that when you look at it. One of the points of taking an art class is to analyze artwork and to understand that there is a deeper meaning behind most famous paintings that we just look at as being pretty or unusual. So here's another still life example that I thought was really important. And this is Vanitas with Violin and Glass Ball by Peter Claes from 1628. And around 1600 is when still lifes became a popular genre painting. So this artist is one of the most important still life painters in history. He's famous for his Vanitas paintings, and Vanitas paintings are still lives that have deeper meaning and usually are talking about death in them. So this is a still life, and it contains symbols of death and change as a reminder of their inevitability. The Veneta are often artists' personal interpretation of death. Caravaggio started this trend with his basket of fruit painting. In this painting, he adds more hidden symbols that depict the frailty of life. For example, in the painting, you can see in the spear a distorted reflection of the artist. This was the artist's way of starting to come to terms with his own mortality. So if you look at the little sphere, you can see very tiny is the artist, and he's painting the painting, which is kind of, an odd feeling. And then there's also a violin and a skull and glass that's been knocked over. And all of these are just talking about, the frailty of human life, how music is beautiful but fleeting, how feathers are so easily changed by the environments around them, and how death is ultimately inevitable. So, can still life drawings have deeper meanings? The answer is yes, and a lot of the time, they're an allegory. So an allegory is a story or poem with characters or events that stand for ideas about life or a political situation. Most of the time there's a moral of the story or a life lesson for the reader to learn. An allegory is like a really long metaphor, which means you can find meaning beyond the literal storyline. So Vanitas is Latin for vanity, and that's what we just looked at. And these paintings with still life symbolism around a central theme with a moral message. They remind the viewer of death, the fragility of human life, and the brevity of our existence. The artist would use items like skulls, timepiece, snuffed out candle to represent the passage of time. Books, musical instruments, very expensive items during this period are there to warn of the futility of worldly pursuits. So the artists were really thinking about all of this when they created their artwork. And I just wanted to include some typical images that you will see in still life. I'll just go over a couple. You can read them if you want. So lobster could mean wealth, gluttony, or temptation. And then you could have a rose, which is the symbol of love. Glass, a life of luxury, or peaches mean good health. All of these symbols have a deeper meaning, and by learning about art and learning about art terms, you can start to understand the meaning just by looking at it. So I wanted to include 2 contemporary still life art examples because this genre of painting is still very popular and still being used. It just looks different. Art evolves with time, and your art will evolve personally as you develop as artists. So this is Ollie Monkey by Peter Jones, and he's kind of creepy looking and bizarre, but it still is a still life. It's just very different than maybe what we think of. And then I really enjoyed this still life. This is Still Life with Golden Goblet. And this painting is basically about like a glitch in time. So we have the traditional fruit basket, and then it almost glitches like the computer or the future, and then all of the paint starts to melt together. Okay, so now we're just going to take a minute to reflect. Try to think about what we just learned about, how all these art pieces have meaning, and write down what was your favorite art piece and why. Do you think still lives have more meaning than they appear to have? Write 2 to 3 sentences about your thoughts in your sketchbook. So if this was class, I would just have you guys take 2 to 3 minutes, but for time purposes, you can just pause. So now we're going to talk about the assignment. So we're going to set up a still life in the classroom, or this can be modified for online learning by having students set up a small still life scene at home, or if not, you could find a photograph online. So we're going to observe the still life, gather supplies, including a piece of drawing paper, a pencil, and eraser, find an easel in the classroom or a comfy spot to draw, and begin. And then we're just going to go over the steps of creating a still life with pencil. So step 1, to begin your still life drawing, lightly sketch basic shapes of the objects you are observing. It's important to put down very basic shapes at this point so you can erase lines later if you make a mistake. This image you can see just very basic lines. We're just talking about shape. We're not talking about anything else here. And then step 2, when looking at your still life setup, try and think about composition in your drawing. What part of the scene are you going to specifically draw? Try to look at the objects as shapes and lines while you think about your composition. Once you've thought about your composition, draw in the rest of your shapes lightly with pencil. So as you can see, starting to get more detailed, starting to think about composition and where things are going to go. So I just wanted to take a quick second to talk about composition. And composition is an arrangement of elements within an artwork. So I wanted to show you this art piece. This is actually a photograph, a life photograph. And the point is that it's all the same scene. This was all the same setup, but all 3 of these images are very different. You have the close-up of the rose or the books, and all of these are successful still lives, and they're all of the same image, but they look very different. So when you are observing the still life that you've set up at home or in the classroom, I want you to think about that. I want you to think, what part am I going to draw? Am I going to focus on a little area? Am I going to focus on the whole picture? All of these things are important when creating art. And to become a good artist, you need to think about every decision that you make and what it might mean to the overall content of your artwork. So once we started to think about composition, you sketch in your basic composition, and now it's time to lightly sketch any types of shadows or reflections on each object. And then step 4, it's time to start shading your still life with pencil. We've gone over shading in previous lessons. Shading with pencil should be a familiar topic. And shading is one of the very first things that we went over. If you remember, there was a chart where you took the pencil and went from light to dark. So this is continuing upon that lesson. This is just an example of how we're starting to get more dark and more detailed. So step 5 is, once you have most of your shading in, it's time to go in with those really dark colors and erase some areas for white highlight. So you can see there's some really dark areas, some really light areas, and it's also got light reflection. We're trying to think about all of that when we look at a piece. Where is the light? Where are the shadows? Where are the highlights? This is how we will begin to break it down and become good artists. So here's some student examples. See, it's just a setup, and if you're doing this at home, you can use anything that you have. And on the other side is a basket of fruit. In the classroom, we can use fake fruit. And you can see the student has put a lot of work and effort into their artwork. They have worked on the shadows and the composition, and everything is very deliberate. So this is a quick still life that I did. And then I just drew this on the Procreate app with a recording software. And I just wanted to quickly show students how I would create a still life. And I just set this up at home with some fake fruit that I found at a thrift store. Okay. This is a speed drawing that just shows you. So that's just a quick drawing of a still life, and you can see how I started out with basic shapes and then started going slowly darker through time. I also thought about the background and the composition, which can be added before or after, whatever you prefer. And that's the finished image. I could have gotten more detailed, but time limit, and also you're gonna have a time limit too, so try to keep that in mind when creating your still life. So now we're gonna jump ahead in the future a little bit. So everyone has created their still life. They've spent a few class periods really observing and drawing, or they've spent a few hours at home really observing and drawing. And after everyone is finished and turned in their artwork, we will have a critique. And a critique is a really important part of the art process. And in a high school art class will happen a large amount of time after projects. And that's just less than class period where students get to quickly introduce their work, and then other students write comments about their artwork and discuss their artwork with the student. This helps the student become a better artist and also helps peers with feedback and understand how they could improve and what they're doing great. So a critique is a discussion strategy used to analyze, describe, and interpret works of art. Critiques help students hone their artistic vision by observing and analyzing your peers' artwork. Observe your peers' artwork and think about how it visually looks. Try and think about the textual meaning as well. So these are questions to think about while critiquing. When was the work created? Where was the work created? Describe the artwork. What are the technical qualities? And then also, what does the work remind you of in your life? How does the work relate to other ideas in the world? What do you think is the deeper meaning behind the still life? All of these are really, really good questions to think about. And they'll help you begin to analyze artwork. So I have created an art critique worksheet, which will be linked. And this is a worksheet that students will work on when critiquing artwork. Once the work is presented, students will write a few sentences, and they have to do this with 3 of their fellow peers. And writing about the artwork gives fellow peers the ability to get feedback and also works on our ability to analyze and talk about art. So here are my references, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you learned something. Thank you.